we talk about some of these guys that are really good at just being on the ball creators and guys that can just get by anybody. There's some really special ones. And then there's Derrick Rose. Like, it just was crazy. And so you started kind of talking, and like, you don't have to listen to me talk about it, but when I would go to draft camps, different teams that I would talk to, just leading up to the draft, you just felt all of this momentum just shift going, looks like it probably should be Rose. Cause like, at the very least, he is perhaps one of the best on-ball guys getting to where he needs to go that we've ever seen. And I think it played out that way for the early stages of his career. So he wins Rookie of the Year. He goes number one, as we know, to his hometown team. He wins the MVP in his third year. And at the time, the LeBron debate existed. And then you go back and look at the numbers and you're like, what happened here? So let's go over a couple things. I think this 2011 thing will come up, and it'll come up, he's going to make it to the Hall of Fame. The debate at the time were really based on a few things. The value of new. Derrick Rose was new. LeBron was not. It was a great story, right? He's in Chicago. They're the one seed. The one seed thing, that's where the seeding stuff with the MVP, I think, gets really, really dicey, where you just go, okay, a couple games here or there. Like, what if he had teammates that were out on this team, and then the rest of his team was healthy, but he may have played, you know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot of factors there where if you want to tell me it's a 1 seed versus 7 seed, okay. Like, it even happened this past year where it's like, okay, well, the Thunder are the 1 seed, so Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like, he has to be. It's super competitive West. Like, look, if you want to just vote for SGA, that's fine. But when the standings are this minimal, I think it can be overvalued. But that was part of it, because you're just going to use it to your side if you're going to argue for Derrick Rose. And I also think LeBron was being judged on the previous 2 LeBron seasons where he'd already won MVP. And there's some statistical dip there a little bit. Had LeBron won that one in 2011, that would have been 5 straight. The voting was overwhelming. Rose won with 113 first-place votes. Howard came in second that year with 3 first-place votes. LeBron had 4 first-place votes. Kobe was the only other player in the league to get a vote. He had 1 first-place vote. So again, 113 for Rose, 8 for everybody else. I'll tell you this, though. If you go back and look at it, whoa. It's like, how did that happen again? Well, remember, voters are generally writers, even way more so back then. I mean, they're probably all writers back then. Writers like stories. The Derrick Rose story was the better story. But yeah, if you go back and do some accounting, you'll think, how did that happen? And how is it so overwhelming? But there's kind of like a little bit of I don't know if it's a lesson, but there's something in there that I do think about, because what's more accurate? The perception of what's happening at the time it's happening, or just scrolling through Basketball Reference and going, well, this guy was good and this guy was better than that guy. And this, because I do think there is some value, right? I do believe there is value in, there's certain players where I'll look at the statistical line. I go, yeah, but what was happening that year was, I don't know if this is a perfect reflection of like what was actually happening that year with that player. I think it happens with quarterbacks a lot too. You'll look at some stats and be like, oh, those stats are actually pretty good, right? You go to Ohio State fans going like, was Kyle McCord? 5 years from now, they're like, why did Kyle McCord leave, right? So I do think it's not even a think. I believe in it. Why watch any of these games if you're just going to wait a few years and go back and be like, every statistical ranking tells 100% truth and everything that you saw in the moment was completely irrelevant. Some people believe that. I refuse to believe that it's this hard and fast rule, because in 2011, even if you look back statistically, like, how did LeBron not win the MVP that year? Maybe being removed a decade is the wrong way to look at it, and just going through a bunch of stats and realizing like the Derrick Rose thing felt real. Or maybe, again, maybe we're a prisoner of the entire moment. A year later, game 1, first round against Philadelphia, tears his knee up. And that's really kind of it for him. I mean, we can argue about how productive he was. We could look at some of the raw stats, but it was just never the same. And if you look at the string of negative stuff, and certainly you've got the off the court civil case as well, but with the Bulls, where he is this, he's the son of the city, he's this next thing, like that's kind of haunted by the greatest player ever. And not that anybody's even expected to live up to that standard. He was kind of everything that you would have wanted when he was drafted. And in those first few years to represent this fan base that's incredible. It just seemed like this perfect story. And then he comes back from the injury, but then he doesn't come back. Remember that? He got cleared and then he didn't want to play. And he said something about like, I still have to worry about the rest of my future. So things start really turning on him. Then he ends up at the Knicks. Remember, there was that story in 2017 where he just left the team for a day, but then he came back. I was reading through that this morning. Like all of these little things were huge at the time, especially the injury controversy of like whether or not he could have been back out there and playing, if he was scared to come back and play, what he owed the team, what he owed himself. But what I think is really cool for Rose is right now, he is so revered by players. And I was listening to a long interview with him. I don't know how recent it was, but I was listening to him and you were like, okay, this is somebody that has grown up through all of this and has some really great perspective on the rest of the league and kind of like where he's been. And I remember Simmons and I were arguing about Westbrook a little bit. And it was basically the point of like, who takes the court where you go, okay, well, this person is just different. Like, this is different. And look, I've said many times, I think Westbrook's the best athlete that's ever played in the NBA. But the position, it wasn't like some heated debate with Bill or I, but we were going through like a list of players that we've seen in this last generation of when you went to go see this person play live, like you knew it was a different experience. And he was arguing up Westbrook probably a little bit more than I was, but I get his point. I think it's a lot of why I'll hear players talk about Kyrie. I'm like, these guys love Kyrie. And look, basketball players from the very beginning, what's the goal when you get that ball? You're like, put it in the hoop and score. It's why, when you look at all the ex-podcasters or the ex-players that are now podcasting, majority of these guys all got buckets. So I think that there's a bias towards anybody that was just a bucket getter beyond it. They don't want to hear about efficiency. They don't want to hear about all this other stuff. Like who gets buckets? It's why you're never going to see like 4 ex-players sitting around saying, how come Kobe's ranked higher than Duncan? It's just never going to happen with any of the ex-players. And Rose is emphatically in that category of the player who at his peak was everything these guys would hope to be one day as players. And that's why there's that reverence. And that's what I think is like the cool part of you're looking at the totality of Rose's career is, yeah, the rest of it wasn't even close to being the same. He had some nice runs on a bunch of teams. It was kind of fun to have him on your team for a little bit, but it's just also a reminder that it wasn't even close to what it was, because when he was at his peak, forget it. He was going by you and he was beating everybody else to the rim in a way that, like Iverson, he was doing things you just didn't think would be possible to dominate a basketball game at that size. I don't know where he's going to stack up historically. He just doesn't have enough of those peak years. It's like a great band that just doesn't have the catalog. But at least, I guess for him, he had the catalog and he had that season, even without the playoff success. But I do think it kind of comes full circle for the way other players look at him going, he played the game the way I used to hope I could play when I was in the driveway.